We are about 5 days after the release of Justice Hunters, and I've been camping locals every night. I'm not claiming to be an expert of any of the three new decks by any means. They are still new decks, but I have a couple of hours of experience now testing all three of them in practical games, and I do think I have enough baseline knowledge to start good discussions about them. Recently, I've seen discussions from TCG players talking about concerns that Yummy will become a tier 0 threat after the new ban list. Personally, just to be direct, I don't think that will happen, and if it does, I'll be quite surprised. It could, but I feel like if it were to happen, it would need to be a build that either hasn't been discovered yet, or I don't know about. But I have only ever seen Pure Yummy, Striker Yummy, Snake Eyes Yummy, or Fiendsmith versions. I also won't be explaining any effects of the cards in this video, it'll mostly be going over strengths and weaknesses of Yummy. So Yummy is one of my favorite decks released in recent times. I really like this deck. If you know me, my favorite cards in current are archetypal cards that play on your opponent's turn. Think Havness, Memento Sleepy, March Hare, and all three of the new decks have cards that summon on your opponent's turn. I love these cards. And Yummy is really an archetype that synchros on your opponent's turn for either follow-up or disruptions. And then these synchros can tag out into various toolbox effects. And of course, I'm also a Claw Machine addict, so I really love the design. Yummy is a deck that is one of the hardest to stop with hand traps probably ever made, to be honest. These small hand traps such as Imperm or Veiler are borderline useless. You can deny them a body earlier and then they can try to recover the body later with the Cupsy Search. Or of course, if it's actually a one card starter, you could stop them with one hand trap if they didn't start with Cupsy, or two hand traps if they did. But that's obviously not good value and also extremely high risk. It's also quite good into bigger hand traps. Of the three new decks, I actually think you could argue that Yummy is the worst in the Maxi, but its Maxi compromise is not really bad at all. I would say Charmleys are largely useless against this deck. Maxi is good, but it's Maxi. The only other two hand traps I would say are consistently good against this deck would be Shifter and Nib. Shifter obviously will one-tap most hands, but since this is only one Shifter and most decks can't play the Shifter either, it's not too important to discuss. Nib is actually a good card against Yummy. Yes, they will eventually make Arclight, but they can't really make Arclight before summon 7, I would say, so you do kill a decent amount of bodies. If they held their summons in hand, then they can make Link Spider and still make a board, but you have effectively denied them some portion of IP, Synchro, and Arclight. The only other ones that sometimes do something are Ogre, Ash, or Purge, and sometimes Dominus Impulse or Bestials. Usually they shouldn't be too high impact though. I have heard that some people say that the M board is not layered. That is true, it's not really layered, but that matters in the context of cards such as Dark Ruler or Droplet and Slayer. I think that this is a bit of an exaggerated problem with the deck, but it is worth mentioning. There are two issues with Dark Ruler. The first is that the majority of a Yummy deck is non-engine, so if you Dark Ruler them, you must still push to their non-engine. Now that is okay, you're going to have to do that anyways, and you don't have to make much to stop Yummy. Even better is that since everything is so low stat, even if you can't push through, you can kill everything in battle at least. The second issue, however, is if you don't kill them, you're going to have to deal with the follow-up, and you're not likely to have second starter, second breaker. Droplet is going to cost you too many cards to push through the non-engine most likely, so that leaves Slayer. And in my testing, Slayer Sand Malung is actually quite effective, but then you have to be playing a deck that can support Slayer. So, in my opinion, I don't think Yummy is particularly weak to breakers or hand traps, but I do think the deck has a very significant issue. The thing I think is the biggest weakness of the deck is the going second potential. Yes, I know I say this in every single current video, but I value a deck very highly based on its engine's ability to go second. The actual Yummy engine is not exceptionally weak or anything, but is very bad into removal. The cards are sprites, not Ryzeals. So why does that matter? Well, if you look at Ryzeal, the reason why the deck was so difficult to stop is because it's an XYZ focused deck that has bodies that come down for free and searched, which means that you need both removal and negates to stop them, and that just meant that the cards were highly efficient. There were a lot of comparisons between sprites and Ryzeals on release, but sprites needed a level 2 established, which meant that they could get stopped by removal. Now this wasn't that likely because Beaver establishes a second body instantly, and they also have other extenders such as Swap Frog. But Ryzeals don't have this problem because each of them had a different summoning condition. X Ryzeal was free and started board breaking immediately when you summoned it. Ice is your normal summon that you have to negate or else they get another body and a search. Sword Ryzeal comes down the moment you establish any of the other ones, and then if you let them make an XYZ, then Node and Star can also come down. It's just too hard to stop them from summoning multiple bodies, so it was often best to let them start making things and then deal with those instead. Yummy, on the other hand, must have a Link 1 or level 2 Synchro on board. And they don't have the extenders to push through the removal. You can use Cubsy to search the Quick Play spell, or if they use Destruction instead of banishing or flipping it, you can try the Field Spell Revive as well. But other than that, it sort of must be 1-for-1, which is always scary because 1-for-1, of course, is -1. So if it gets stopped somehow by means of either Ash Blossom or some sort of negate on their board, then you basically lose the game. That's why I think the best build at the moment is probably the Striker build, because the Striker deck starts without your normal summon to establish a Link 1, and you have multiple different starters. The issue with Fiendsmith is now with only one Fiendsmith and one Tractus, then you can't really start with those. So what happened to Fiendsmith is that it actually became an option to go into if hand traps start your actual starters. Except Yummy doesn't really have that problem, so it ends up being not that efficient when you pair them together. Let's take any meta deck or good deck. Whitewoods, for example. Actually, Whitewoods is not that good of an example because it's the most cringe legal deck right now that decks and board overkills the strongest engines legal 4 times over. But let's just take any portion of the end board. The Barone, the Sylvia, the Danzai Pop, the Snake Eyes Dragon Push, Guardian Chimera, Appaloosa. The Silvera flip is actually the strongest interrupt out of all of those. So even if you open God card Obedience Schooled, then if they Silvera flip your entire board, then you're completely dead. We can also look at other decks. Memento has 2 to 3 layers of pops, and an Appaloosa, and a Monster Steel, and a Spell and Trap pop. There's just no way you will ever pass that board. Malice, 1 MTP and you're dead, not addressing the Appaloosa or the Omni. Blue Eyes, 1 Drill Beam or Seals, or even tagging into the Omni to stop the Extender is going to be extremely hard to repair. Orcust is barely considered good anymore, but obviously stealing your normal summon and then having to pass an Omni Negate and a Symbol Skeleton summoning a Dingirsu is not going to happen. Ryziel is probably not that playable next format, but you can imagine how that would go. This is surprisingly actually less bad than the boards mentioned above. It's actually not as bad to play into a Detonator as you might think because you can start summoning bodies without activating anything, but you still won't pass the board. Even the 2 new decks, Dragontail and K9, I can say quite confidently that Yummy doesn't really pass just the 2 Dragontail traps alone, ignoring the fusions. If they just compulse the normal and then negate the extender, then you're completely dead. K9, if they use Nash to suck up your normal, that's also going to be quite devastating. There is just no such thing as a deck that does not have removal on the end board right now. Obviously, your deck has a ton of non-engine, so you might stop them from getting there. I'm not saying that they make the Giga board every single game, but the reason I listed all of the interrupts is even if you stop some portion of it, you can't even push through 1 or 2 of the interrupts. Some of these decks are also very difficult to stop with hand traps, and more importantly, whenever a deck must rely hard on its non-engine to function at all, they typically don't have the best results of a format. I would actually love for Yummy to be a tier 0 threat, especially because this format is the one where all the most important OCG tournaments happen, and I'm really trying to figure out what the deck I'm going to play this format is as early as possible, so I can spend as much time working on my technical play. And unfortunately, I do think I will most likely be going with Malice. Just to clarify, I'm not saying Yummy is a bad deck. It still has many great strengths. I just feel like the going second issue especially is extremely obvious once you start playing the deck. You'll definitely feel it if you play even 1 match with the deck, at most 2 matches. And that's why it's so strange to me because I haven't really seen any English-speaking player talking about this yet. But that's about all I have for today's Yummy discussion. If there's enough interest, I'll go over the other 2 decks, but I made the Yummy video first because TCG players adore this deck, at least much more than the other 2 decks. Actually, one thing I want to mention about K9 real quick is that personally, I think the pure version of the deck is a bit design flaw, or that's a bit harsh, but I do think it has very noticeable problems when actually playing the game. But I do think there is potential that you can maybe just try the Havnus portion of the deck, where you play a 3-to-1 ratio of 17 and the Wolf, and then you can use those to basically act as a pseudo Gamma. If you have a really open extra deck, you can also play Nash and 104 to Honor Arc your opponent on their turn, and that's extremely strong and a unique form of removal. So I think that's something with potential that people can maybe start testing.